You become a gravedigger on the morning there is no one left to dig the graves. Not by choice. No one chooses this. You become one because the man who did it before you is dead, and the man before him is dead. And the two brothers who carried the bier through the parish of San Donato are both dead. And the city of Siena, perhaps 50,000 souls a year ago, is running out of hands, fast enough to bury its own. This is the 23rd of May, in the year 1348. Hold that date. By the end of it, you will have carried more bodies than you carried in the whole of last year. And last year was a hard year. By October, by the reckoning of a man who survived to write it down, 80,000 people will be dead in this city and the land around it. He counted. He was a shoemaker who kept the town's accounts, and he buried his own children with his own hands, and we will meet him before the day is over. The name I will give my gravedigger is a borrowed one. The men who did this work in Siena that summer mostly died without leaving their names, the way the people they buried died without leaving theirs. So the name is a composite, stitched from several real men of the bikini, the body carriers, who are named in passing in the tax rolls and the parish registers, and the one great chronicle that comes down to us. The work he does is real. The street is real. The half-built cathedral wall on the hill above the city is real. You can still climb it today, and by the end of this, it will tell you everything about the day we are about to live. The words I put in his mouth are a reconstruction in the spirit of what the survivors actually wrote. Everything that can be checked, I have checked. Call him Cecco. He is somewhere past 40, which in Siena, in 1348, makes him an old man. He has a bad hip from a fall off a scaffold years ago, back when there was building work, back when half the men in this city were masons and the other half were carting stone up the hill. He sleeps in a single room off the Vicolo behind the Campo, and he wakes before the bells because his hip wakes him. The bells. Start with the bells because that is what he wakes to. In a normal May, the bells of Siena are a kind of music you stop hearing because it never stops. Matins before dawn from the Dominicans at San Domenico. The cathedral chapter at the top of the town. The friars at the Servi. Each house keeps its own hours, and the sound rolls down the slopes and crosses in the air over the Campo, and a man like Cecco tells the time of day by which bell is speaking. This morning, the bells are wrong. There are too many of them, and they are all ringing the same thing. And the thing they are ringing is the passing bell, the toll for the dead. One stroke, then a wait, then another. The trouble is that there are now so many dead that the passing bells have stopped passing for individuals and started simply ringing, on and on. A flat, continuous tolling that no longer means a person, but means a number. Later in the summer, the city fathers will order the bells silenced altogether, because the sound of them, all day, every day, is breaking what is left of people's nerve. But that order is weeks away. This morning, the bells still ring, and Cecco lies in the dark and listens. And he does the thing everyone in Siena now does first thing in the morning before they do anything else. He takes stock of his own body. He runs a hand along his own neck, under his jaw, into his armpit, down to the soft place at the top of the leg. He is feeling for a lump. There is no lump. Not today. He gets up. He does not know what is killing them. No one knows. Understand how complete that not knowing is, because it is the thing that separates his world from yours more than anything else in it. You, watching this, carry a word in your head that he does not have. You think bacterium. You think the bite of a flea that has fed on a rat, and the small, rod-shaped thing in the flea's gut, the one a microscope will not see for another 500 years, the one that has a name now, Yersinia pestis, the name of a man who found it in Hong Kong in 1894. Cecco has none of that. For Cecco, the cause of this is one of three things, and educated men argue about which. It is a corruption in the air, a bad vapor, a miasma that rose from somewhere and is settling over the towns. Or it is the stars, the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter and Mars in the house of Aquarius, which the masters of the university at Paris named, in a formal report to the King of France, as the cause. Or, and this is the one most people in the street actually believe, it is the hand of God, drawn back and striking, for sins so general that no single man can be sure which of his own brought it down. What he does know is the shape of it, because he has now seen it many times. It begins with a heaviness. A man is tired in a way that sleep does not fix. Then the fever, fast and very high, and a headache that makes the light unbearable. Then, under the arm, or in the groin, or at the side of the neck, a swelling. Small at first, the size of an almond, then a walnut, then an egg, hard and dark, and so painful that grown men weep when it is touched. The Sienese have a word for these. They call them, with the grim plainness of people who have run out of better words, the gavoccioli. When the gavoccioli appear, the family knows. 3 days, the survivors say, 4 if God is slow. The fever, the swelling, the dark blotches that spread across the skin like wine spilled under a tablecloth. And then, the end. He has seen it in his neighbor. He has seen it in the breadwoman. He has seen it, 4 days ago, in his own brother-in-law. And he was the one who carried him out. So that is the morning. Cecco stands in his cold room, his hip aching, the wrong bells ringing, and he eats what he has, which is a heel of bread and a little hard cheese and water from the clay jug. And he does not light a fire because it is May, and because lighting a fire means going out for fuel, and the less he is out among other people, the longer, he reasons, he stays alive. He has reasoned wrong, as it happens. The thing that will reach for him is not in other people's breath. It is in the fleas that are already in the straw of his own bed and the seams of his own coat, riding the rats that have always lived in the walls of every house in every city he has ever known. But he cannot know that. No one will know that for 500 years. So he sits with his bread, away from the door, and feels clever, and waits for the man who will come to fetch him to work. The man comes. His name is Giovanni, and he is the closest thing the parish now has to an official of the dead, which is to say, he is the one holding the list. A year ago, Giovanni was a notary's clerk. Now he carries a wax tablet and a stub of stylus, and on the tablet are the houses where someone has died in the night and not yet been taken away. He reads the first one to Cecco from the doorway, standing well back, a cloth soaked in vinegar pressed over his nose and mouth, because the whole city now believes the sickness travels in smells, and the worst smell in Siena this May is the one Cecco is about to spend his day inside. There are 11 houses on the tablet, 11 in one parish from one night. In a good year, this parish might bury 11 people between Easter and the Feast of St. John, which is a month off. Cecco takes his tools, which are a wooden bier with 2 poles, a spade, and a long iron hook for the bodies he is not willing to touch with his hands. He pulls his own cloth up over his face. He follows Giovanni out into the narrow street, into the grey early light, into the smell, and the bells go on ringing their flat, unbroken note above the rooftops. And somewhere above all of it, on the highest ground in the city, the great, half-built wall of the new cathedral stands against the sky, scaffolding still on it, the stone going pale gold as the sun comes up, waiting for the masons who will not be coming back. We will get to that wall. It is the strangest thing in this whole story, and it is still standing, and it explains everything. But first, there is the morning's work, and the morning's work is the 11 houses. The first house is on a lane so narrow that 2 men cannot pass without turning sideways. This is how Siena is built. It climbs 3 ridges and folds into the valleys between them, and the lanes were laid for mules and handcarts, not for biers, and a body has to be carried out at an angle, tipped, man-handled, because there is no straight line between a third-floor room and the street. In a normal year, a death is a slow ceremony. The body is washed by the women of the family. It is wrapped. It lies a day or 2 while relatives come. A priest says the office. The neighbors walk behind it to the church. None of that is happening now. There is no time. There are no women left in some of these houses to do the washing, and there are not enough priests upright to say the office over 1/10 of the dead. Cecco goes up. He has learned to read a house from its doorway. A door standing open is bad. It means no one shut it, which means no one is well enough to care. A silence is worse than crying, because crying means someone is still alive in there to cry. This first house is silent. He goes up the dark stair with his cloth over his face, and the smell tells him most of the story before his eyes do. There are 2 in the bed. He does not need to look closely to know they are gone, and he has learned this past month not to look closely, because the faces are the part that stays with you. He uses the hook. He gets them onto the bier, one and then the other, and he is already calculating, because that is what the work has made him into, a man who calculates. 2 here, 11 houses. He cannot carry 2 bodies down these stairs and across the city to a burial ground and come back 11 times before dark. The arithmetic does not work. It has not worked for a week. Here is a thing worth stopping on, because it is the kind of detail that tells you more than any number. At the start of all this, back in March, when the dying was bad but not yet beyond reckoning, a man could still hire a proper burial. There was a rate for it. You paid the bikini, you paid for the candles, you paid the priest, you paid for a place in consecrated ground. And a poor family would ruin itself to do this properly, because to be buried without the office, in unconsecrated earth, was to risk the soul. As the dying got worse, the price went up. Of course it did. The men willing to handle the dead grew fewer, and the dead grew more. And the bikini who were left could name their price, and they did. For a few weeks in the spring, carrying a body to its grave in Siena cost more than most men earned in a season. The chronicler we are coming to records this with a kind of disgust, that the living were robbed by the carriers of the dead, that money meant nothing, that a man would give anything to have his wife buried, and the carriers would still demand more. And then the strangest thing of all happened to the price. It collapsed. Not because mercy broke out, because the thing money buys, scarcity, inverted. There were so many dead, and so few who cared whether they were buried with ceremony or thrown in a pit, that the whole economy of dying simply ceased to function. By May, the month we are in, you cannot hire a proper burial in Siena for any money, because there is no longer such a thing. The priests who would say the office are dead or hiding. The consecrated ground is full. The ceremony has stopped existing. What is left is Cecco and his beer, and a hole in the ground, and he does not charge for it, because there is no one to charge and nothing to charge for. He does it because the bodies are in the streets otherwise, and a city cannot live among its own dead, even a dying city. So a thing that was, 2 months ago, a market, with prices and bargaining and ruinous costs, has become a public chore done by exhausted men for no wage at all. That is what a catastrophe does to the ordinary machinery of a place. It does not just kill people, it dissolves the rules that organize them. By mid-morning, Cecco has stopped carrying bodies to the burial grounds one by one. Nobody is doing that anymore. Instead, the parish has done what every parish in the city is now doing, what the Chronicle says plainly happened. They have dug pits. Great trenches, as deep as men have strength to dig them, in any open ground that can be found. Churchyards overflowing into gardens, gardens into waste plots. And the bodies go into the pits in layers. A layer of the dead, a thin scatter of earth over them, then the next day, another layer of the dead, and a little more earth, and so on. The way, the chronicler writes, you would store goods on a ship, packing the hold tight, course upon course. Cecco's work is no longer carrying single bodies to single graves. It is feeding the pit. He brings what the morning gives him, and he tips it in, and he goes back for more. And the earth between the layers is thin, too thin, because there are not enough hands to dig it deep, and not enough hours in the day. He knows this is wrong. Every man doing it knows it is wrong. These are not heathens. These are people who believe, with their whole lives, that the body must lie in blessed ground and rise whole at the end of days, and that to be flung in a pit without right is a horror visited on the worst criminals. And now it is being visited on everyone, on grandmothers and on baptized infants, and on men who gave to the church every feast day of their lives. There is a particular cruelty in this that the survivors never quite got over, and you can hear it in how they wrote about it afterward. It was not only that people died, it was that they died wrong, and were buried wrong, and the people who loved them had to choose between leaving a body to rot in a closed room and handing it to a man like Cecco to be tipped, unblessed, into a trench with strangers. There is a pause, around noon, that Cecco has come to depend on, and it is worth describing because it is the most human thing in his day. The heat of midday is the one time the streets are almost empty. People keep indoors against the bad air. The light is high and white, and it flattens the color out of the brick, and for an hour the bells, which have been tolling all morning, fall into a kind of lull, and Cecco sits on a step in the shade of the Campo, that great sloping, shell-shaped square that is the heart of the city, and which you have very likely seen in photographs, where they still run the horse race twice a summer. And he eats. Bread again, a few olives if he has them, and for that hour he is not a gravedigger. He is a man with a bad hip, eating his bread in the shade of the most beautiful square in Tuscany, with the great striped tower of the town hall throwing its shadow across the bricks, exactly as it does today. And if he does not look too hard at the closed shutters all around the square, at the doors marked with the rough cross that means plague within, he can almost believe in an ordinary day. But he cannot help looking. And what he sees, when he lets himself, is that the campo is wrong, in the same way the bells are wrong. It is too empty. This is the trading floor of one of the richest cities in Europe, a place that should be roaring at noon with wool merchants and money changers and the criers of the law. And it is nearly silent. A dog crosses it. A single woman hurries along the edge with her face wrapped. The great civic machine of Siena, the council that governs the city, the famous 9, who have ruled it for 60 years and will go on, just for a few more. The courts, the guilds, the tax officers, all of it is grinding to a halt, because the men who turn the wheels are in the pits. And Cecco, finishing his bread, knows that the afternoon will be worse than the morning, because the afternoons have all been worse than the mornings for a month, and that somewhere in the houses he has not yet reached, on Giovanni's wax tablet and beyond it, there is one particular family whose dying is going to mark this day in the one chronicle that survives. He does not know that yet, but the man who will write it is, this very noon, somewhere in this same city, and he is not yet finished losing what he is going to lose. The afternoon brings the thing Cecco dreads more than the bodies, which is the dogs. With so many corpses going into pits too shallow to hold them, with the thin earth cracking and shifting in the May heat, the dogs of the city have learned what the smell means. They dig. The Chronicle says this in one flat sentence that is more terrible than any amount of weeping would be. The bodies were so poorly covered with earth that the dogs dragged them out and devoured them through the city. Read that again slowly. The dead are being eaten in the streets by the animals that a year ago those same dead fed at their own tables. Cecco spends part of every afternoon driving dogs off the pits with his spade, and it is a battle he loses, because there is one of him and there are many of them, and they are, by now, no longer afraid of a man. This is the hour to introduce the man we have been promising you, because his afternoon and Cecco's are running side by side through the same dying city. His name is Agnolo di Tura. He is real. We are not borrowing him or composing him. He existed. He lived in Siena, and he wrote. By trade, he was a shoemaker, and he also kept accounts for the commune, a literate tradesman, exactly the kind of careful, unliterary man whose plain record is worth more to us than any poet's. He was nicknamed, in the Sienese way, Agnolo il Grasso, Agnolo the Fat, and he was this spring the father of 5 children. What Agnolo wrote about this year is the spine of everything you have heard so far, because almost every concrete detail of Siena in 1348 that survives, the pits, the layers like cargo, the collapse of burial, the price of carrying the dead, the dogs, comes from his pen. He wrote it, by his own account, in his own hand. And then he wrote the sentence that historians have not been able to read without flinching for 600 years. He wrote that he buried his 5 children with his own hands. Father of 5. He did not have a Cecco to call, or he did, and there was no Cecco left to come, or no point in calling one, because what was the becchino going to do that the father could not? In a city where ceremony had ceased, and the only thing left was the digging. So Agnolo dug. A shoemaker, an accountant, a literate man of the middling sort, on his knees in the Tuscan earth, putting his own children into the ground, one after another, and then getting up and going on living, and at some point sitting down with a pen to make sure that someone, someday, would know it happened. He added one more line that I want you to hold, because it is the truest thing anyone wrote about this entire catastrophe. He wrote that so many died that all believed it was the end of the world, not as a figure of speech, as a literal expectation. A man burying his children in May of 1348 had every reason to think the human story was simply ending, here, now, in his lifetime, that there would be no more generations, that the world was being unmade. That is the weight Cecco carries up and down the lanes all afternoon, and it is the weight Agnolo carries to his own children's grave. And neither of them has the one thing you have, which is the knowledge that it ends, that the dying stops, that in 2 years Siena will be quiet and half empty, but still standing, that there will be harvests again, and weddings again, and eventually more children. They cannot see 2 years ahead. They can only see the pit. Toward evening, the heat goes out of the day, and the city changes character, the way it always has. In an ordinary Siena, dusk is the kindest hour, the bricks holding the warmth, the swallows out, the bells ringing vespers, and the working day closing. This evening, the swallows are still there, indifferent, wheeling over rooftops that have lost a third of the people under them. The bells ring vespers out of habit, fewer of them now, some houses gone silent for good. And the smell, which the heat had lifted all day, settles back down into the lanes as the air cools, thick and sweet and unmistakable. And Cecco, going home, breathes it through his cloth, and knows it is in his clothes and his hair and his skin, and that he will never, as long as he lives, however long that is, get it fully out. The survivors said this too, that the smell stayed with them, that for years afterward, a certain warmth, a certain closeness in the air would bring the whole of that summer back. He passes the church of his own parish on the way home. The door is open. Inside it is dim, and there are no candles lit, because candles cost money, and there is no one to give the money, and anyway, the priest who would light them is 3 weeks dead. Cecco stands a moment in the doorway. He is not a holy man. The work has not made him holy. If anything, it has worn the religion thin in him, the way it wore it thin in a whole generation, because he has now buried, without right, hundreds of people who deserved better, and the heaven that was supposed to be watching has given no sign. This is the quiet thing the plague did that no chronicle measures directly. It cracked something in the faith of the people who lived through it. Not all at once, and not in everyone, but a hairline crack ran through the certainty of an age, the certainty that the world was ordered and watched and just. You prayed, and your children died anyway. You confessed, and the swelling came anyway. A man who has buried 5 children with his own hands, or hundreds of strangers, does not believe in quite the same God afterward, even if he still believes. And the historians who study what came after, the questioning, the upheaval, the slow turn toward a world that would eventually argue with heaven instead of only obeying it, trace a thread of it back to rooms exactly like this one, and evenings exactly like this one, and men exactly like Cecco, standing in an unlit doorway with the smell of the pits on him, finding that he has nothing left to say to God. He goes home in the last light. Behind him, the city settles into a night that will be the same as the morning, because the plague does not keep hours. Somewhere a few streets over, Agnolo the shoemaker is sitting in a house that is far too quiet, with 5 empty places in it, and at some point in the months ahead, he will take up his pen. And above them both, catching the very last of the sun, stands the wall, the great, unfinished wall on the high ground, the new cathedral that was going to be the largest in all of Christendom. And we have put it off long enough, because everything that happened in Siena this day is written into that wall, and it is still there. And tomorrow, in the last part of this story, we are finally going to climb up to it and find out what it means. Night in Siena, in the plague summer, was not rest. Cecco lay in his single room with his hip aching and the bells, the few that still rang, tolling somewhere below. And he did the thing he had done that morning, the thing everyone did. He ran his hand under his jaw, into his armpit, down to the groin, feeling for the lump. This was the real clock of the city now, not the bells. Each night you checked, and each morning that you woke without a swelling was a day you had been given, and you got up and went back to the pits. We do not know and cannot know whether Cecco woke the next morning or not. The bikini died at a rate that frightened even the survivors, because the work put them among the dead all day, every day. Many of the men who fed the pits ended in them. That is the plain likelihood for a body carrier in Siena in the summer of 1348. And the story does not get to give him a kinder one just because we have walked the day beside him. But the city woke. That is the thing to hold on to as the night ends. Siena did not become the end of the world, however much it looked like it from inside that May. The dying ran through the summer, savage from April to October by Agnolo's reckoning. And then it began, for reasons no one understood any more than they had understood its coming, to slacken. The pits stopped filling. The bells, when the council finally let them ring properly again, rang for individuals once more, which was its own strange mercy. To be mourned, one at a time, was a luxury the spring had taken away. And then there was the counting, and the counting is where the scale of it finally lands. How many died? Agnolo, who was there, who buried his own, wrote that 80,000 perished in the city and its territory in those 7 months. Historians treat that figure with care, because medieval chroniclers reached for big round numbers the way we reach for them, and Siena and its countryside together did not hold so very many more than that. But every careful modern estimate that has gone back to the tax rolls and the parish books arrives somewhere brutal. The best study of Sienese society through the plague, by the American historian William Bowski, who spent his career in the archives of this one city, found a government and a population gutted, a commune that lost something close to half of its people and never, in the lifetime of anyone then living, got them back. Half. Walk through any room you know and take away every second person, and you have the Siena of 1349. The city that had been climbing toward the front rank of Italian powers, rich on wool and banking and the Pilgrim Road, the rival of Florence itself, stopped climbing in this one summer and never resumed. And that is where we finally climb the hill to the wall, because the wall is the proof, and it is the most extraordinary monument to this day that exists anywhere in the world, and you can put your hand on it. Go back 9 years, to 1339. Siena was so confident, so rich, so sure of its future, that it decided its great cathedral, already one of the finest in Italy, was not enough. The plan was breathtaking. They would take the existing cathedral and make it merely the transept, the crossbar, of a vast new church built out at right angles to it. A cathedral so enormous it would have been the largest in all of Christendom, larger than anything in Florence, larger than Rome. They began. The work went up through the early 40s. The nave wall rose and the great facade, and you can see in the stonework the ambition of a city that believed nothing could stop it. Then came the summer we have just lived through. The masons died, or fled, or were carrying their own children to the pits like everyone else. The money that came from a city of perhaps 50,000 was now coming from half that. The men who had voted the project, the careful 9, were dying with the rest. The work slowed and faltered, and within a few years it was admitted that the half-built giant had structural faults anyway, and it was abandoned, and it was never finished, and it never will be. What stands today on the highest ground in Siena is that warm. The Sienese call it il facciatone, the great facade, the beginning of a cathedral that the Black Death cancelled. You can climb a narrow stair to the top of it and stand where the roof of the largest church in Christendom was supposed to be. And there is no church, only the wall, and the air, and the red roofs of the city falling away below you. It is a doorway into a sky. It is the single most honest war memorial I know of, except that the war was a bacterium, and it is not in any of the guidebooks under the heading they should put it. Because what that wall really is the exact line where the future of a city stopped. Everything above the line is the Siena that planned to be the greatest in Italy. Everything that did not get built is the Siena that died in the pits in the summer of 1348, the 80,000 of Agnolo's count, the half of everyone, the 5 children buried by a shoemaker with his own hands. The wall is where their future was, the future that was never built because the hands that would have built it were gone. I have stood up there on the Facciatone on a bright afternoon with tourists taking photographs of the view, and almost none of them knew what they were standing on. That is usually how it is with the past. The worst days leave the quietest monuments. A wall that just stops. A square that is too beautiful to look like a graveyard, but is built over the bones of the people we have spent this hour with. If you have walked through this day with me, through Cecco's morning, and the 11 houses, and the pits, and the dogs, and Agnolo burying his children, and the wall that marks where it all stopped, then do one thing for me before you go. Subscribe to the channel. I rebuild these days one at a time, one city, one year, one ordinary person who was there, and the only thing that tells me to keep climbing back into them is you, staying and subscribing, and telling the people who watch beside you. Every one of these days deserves to be remembered by more than a wall that nobody reads. A word on where all this comes from, because this channel does not invent. The pits, the layered bodies stacked like cargo, the collapse of burial, the dogs that drag the dead from the shallow earth, the 80,000, the end of the world, the 5 children buried by hand. All of it is from the Chronicle of Agnolo di Tura del Grasso, who lived in Siena and survived this summer and wrote it down. The reconstruction of the city's losses leans on the archival work of William Bowski. The cathedral that was cancelled, the Duomo Nuovo, begun in 1339 and abandoned in the wake of the plague, stands today as the Facciatone, exactly as described, and you can climb it. Cecco is a composite, given a borrowed name, doing real work in a real place on a real day. Agnolo was real, and his children were real, and he buried them himself. The plague would come back. It returned within a generation in the 1360s, and again, a returning tide for 300 years. But the Siena that emerged from this first and worst visitation was a different city in a smaller world. A city that had looked at the end of everything and against all the evidence of that summer had not ended. The people of 1348 could not see past the pit. We can. We know the bells rang again, and the swallows came back, and the city stands. Their world did not end. And, on the far side of whatever you are afraid of as you watch this, neither most likely will yours. I will see you in the next one.